All right, today we have a 2013 Mustang GT. What we're going to be doing is installing a lowering kit, which is the coil springs, and it also includes a handling upgrade, which is the sway bars. So we're going to be showing you how to put in the coil springs, sway bars, and also new front struts. The reason we're doing this, the car from the factory has a pretty high ride height. You can see here the gap in the wheel well, and the handling is just known to be improved by upgrading the suspension a little bit. So the customer wanted to bump up the handling a little bit and just make it more fun of a car to drive around the corners. So what we did, we special ordered our suspension kit from Auto Parts Direct to You. Called them up, they were able to get it for us, and we're going to show you how to put it in. So we'll get it up in the air and get the wheels off. Okay, so now we're looking at the rear suspension of the car. The kit is going to change out the rear sway bar, the rear coil springs. The customer opted at this time to just reuse the rear shocks. They're an easy change in the future, so that's no big deal. But our first step is going to be to take off this rear sway bar bushing mount here, and then we're going to disconnect the shock bolt, and we're going to do that on both sides, and then the sway bar should pull out of the way. Also, you'll see we have the rear differential supported by a jack stand right now. Reason for that is there's some tension from the coil springs onto the shock, so you want to take that tension off before taking these bolts out. So we'll go ahead and take these off, take these bolts out, pull the sway bar out of the way, and then hopefully we'll let the springs out. There we go. Now our rear sway bar's down and out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect these lower shock bolts. So now with the rear shocks disconnected and the sway bar pulled back and out of our way, we should be able to lower the spin jack here and release the tension on our springs and hopefully pop them out. We want to keep a close eye on the brake lines and the ABS wires and make sure nothing's getting tensioned as we do this. Looking okay. Oh, let's see. All right. Yeah, so we're putting some tension on the rear brake hose right up in here. What I'm going to do is just to relieve that tension, there's a 10mm bolt that holds this bracket on, and that should allow this to drop down enough so that we don't have to worry about damaging that brake hose. I'm going to do that on both sides. And you can see here, if we pop this out of the frame, there we go. Now we got plenty of slack on that. All right, so now that we have those freed up, I'm going to continue lowering the rear differential. And hopefully the springs will just pop out. If not, we might have to use a little extra force to pull the differential down. There we go, very close. All right, here's one coil spring out. The other side should come out exactly the same. All right, so here you can see our difference between the old and the new ones. The new ones are a beefier spring. They're smaller, a little bit smaller height. And you can really tell the difference between the weaker stock spring and the performance upgrade. So at this point, we'll just go ahead and pop these back up into the same spot where they went. When you put these in on this particular spring, the instructions do say to make sure that the logo is facing upward so that you can read it. And then that's the correct orientation. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and install our new coil springs. All they do is sit right up in the same spot where the factory ones went. That's one. You want to make sure you don't pop these rubber bushings out of the way as you're putting it in there. And on these, there's really no correct orientation for them to sit. So I usually just spin them around until they look like they're sitting flush. And that should be good. All right, so next we'll bring our rear differential back up and reinstall our shock bolts. All right, so we're going to bring the differential up. All right, so now we can move our spin jack out of the way. Since the shocks are supporting the weight of the rear end again. Yep, I'll do that now. And I'll go ahead and reconnect our brake line brackets. And on the other side. Okay, so now what we're going to do is change out the rear sway bar. This kit comes with the new rear sway bar, bushings, and these links. It comes with new versions of those. So we're just going to take this whole thing out at once. I'm going to take out these two 15mm bolts. There's one at the top of here and one on the other side. Tension off there, that just pops right out. And same over here, and our whole sway bar comes out. Okay, so here you can see our new sway bar laid out next to the old one. The big difference, it's got a slightly different geometry. I think it's also a slightly stronger steel, which keeps it from flexing as much. But it comes with these new high density bushings and these new connection rods. Okay, so now our first step outside the car when installing this, what we need to do is put our links on. And the way we do this is first we want to lubricate the inside of this bushing here with the supplied grease. So we're just going to squirt a little in there and spread it around. Once we do that, we should be able to just slide the bushing down into place. And then we're going to pop this connecting rod over it, like so. And you'll see this cap goes on like that. Now we're just going to put these in and not actually tighten them yet, because we'll tighten them once they're in their final position using Locktite. So just to hold it in place, just put them in and start them. Don't actually tighten them down yet. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts out of the rod here, and we will pick up the sway bar and set it in place. All right, so now we're going to set our sway bar into place, and it'll be good to have a helper that can slide the bolt in place for you when you get it lined up. So while I hold that, if you don't mind. There we go. So we got one side in, and then the other side. Okay, so we can just leave that supported like so. I'm going to go ahead and put our washer and nut on just to have it there. We'll tighten it down in a minute. Now this kit comes with new hardware to support the rear sway bar bushing, so we needed to remove this factory one, which comes out just like so. Just kind of angle them down, and then there's a little clip there that you might have to fight with, and they pop out. Okay, so next we're going to put our outer bushing in place. Again, we're going to pre-lubricate it. And slide it on. Now the clamp goes over like so. And it goes up in place. Now it comes with a new spacer, which goes behind the factory bracket. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take our cap bolts back out, and going to put some Loctite on them and reinstall them again, and this time tighten them down. The kit does include Loctite just for this purpose. So we're going to open it up here. And just put a little dot right on the threads here, and then reinstall. The reason I waited till this point is to make sure everything was in place where we wanted it, because once you tighten down these bolts with Loctite, you don't want to loosen them again. Now that we've got our caps on tight and Loctited, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the top bolts here. And these bottom ones, I'm just going to snug it up first a little bit, or get it closer. And push it up just a little bit so it's kind of centered. Okay, last thing on the rear suspension is the rear springs came with new bump stops to change those, we're going to start by taking out these two T40 bolts to take off this whole bracket piece. And this whole piece should just pull up out of here. There we go. Now this old bump stop, probably gonna have to cut it out of here. Probably should have tried to force it out before I pulled it out of the car. Yeah, we're gonna have to cut it. So I'm gonna cut this out real fast. Okay, so we got our old one out. Here's our new one that comes with the springs. We're gonna see if we can do this without any fancy tools. Just have to pop this in like so. Almost there. There it goes. All right, there's our new bump stop. And that just reinstalls on there. All right, and with that, we are done with the rear suspension. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the front now. Okay, so now we're looking at the front strut. We're on the driver's side here. What we're going to do is just start taking off the components that go to the strut. We have this bracket right here which attaches the brake line and ABS sensor to the strut. And we also have up here, can't see right now, but there's the upper sway bar attachment there. And so we're going to take those off, and then we're going to take off the actual strut mounting nuts to the spindle here, or the steering knuckle. So I'll start with that one 10mm bolt. All right, now we're going to take off our upper sway bar mount here. We'll just let that hang aside. All right, now we're going to take off these two nuts which hold the strut to the steering knuckle itself. Had to give these bolts a little persuasion to get them free. That's why. They've got, I'll show you here in a second, they've got splines on them that keep them from spinning. See this bolt? These splines actually press into the steering knuckle so that when it's in there, that grips on and the bolt won't free spin, so you can tighten the nut. But then you need to use a little persuasion to get it out of there. So now I'll just pull those out. You might have to push on the rotor a little bit to get some free play on that thing. There we go. Now let's make sure before we let all the tension off this. All right, what I'm going to do is just bungee this thing out of the way and just leave it there for now, because it's okay if it hangs there. All right, so now what we need to do is lower the car and undo the three nuts that hold the strut into the top of the strut tower. So we'll get the car lowered and meet you under the hood. Okay, so now we're under the hood. There's actually 4 nuts that hold on the top of the strut tower mount, or the strut mount. So I'm just going to take these 4 off. I'm going to leave one though. Now this last one, as I go to take this off, what we need to do is actually hold the strut from underneath at the same time. The reason for that is if you don't, it'll just fall out. So I'm going to start loosening it. And as it gets looser, I'll reach down and grab the strut assembly. And at this point, I'm going to reach underneath here and lift up. And hope I don't lose that. Okay, now we're just going to pull the whole strut assembly out of the car. And unfortunately my bungee cord's in the way, so there we go. Now we're going to have to disassemble this and replace. Main reason we need this chunk of parts up here off this strut assembly, because we're going to be replacing the strut and the spring, but we're going to reuse the strut mount. This will require a specialty tool. This you can actually usually borrow from a local auto parts store if you don't have one yourself. They call it a loaner tool. It's a coil spring compressor designed for struts. The way this works is it'll clamp onto the spring, and then when we tighten down this bolt, it'll compress the spring. And this is kind of the scary part that a lot of people are hesitant to do, because there's a lot of tension on this coil spring, and it can be a little bit dangerous, but if you do it correctly and use the right tools, there should be no issues. So what we'll do is take our tool here, put it on the lowest possible part that we can get on this coil spring, and on this side, hook it up here. We'll push our pins out, which kind of locks it in place if it'll go. Well, good enough. Sort of goes. Okay. As soon as we start to put tension on this thing, it'll all hold together a little better. So what I'm going to do is slowly tighten down one side and then the other, one and then the other, and go back and forth until we get the tension off the top of this coil spring. So I was able to see it's starting to pull away from this top strut mount. What I'm going to do is go ahead and begin to loosen our top nut up here and see if it'll start to come off and if the spring becomes loose. If not, I'm going to have to tighten this a little bit more, but it's getting pretty tight, so I'm kind of hesitant to go too much further. Now again, I'm going to do this real carefully and just slowly loosen it up. I'm not going to take this off all the way. All right, good. I can see the majority of the tension is off this thing, it looks like. So I'm going to take it off a little bit more. Oh no, that's not supposed to happen. That's not good. So I just pulled this apart and my bearing came apart. All right, so I got our bearing back together. Fair warning for anybody working on this, these Ford bearings apparently separate real easy, which I didn't realize. But it seems to be in good shape. I got all our bearings still in there. So we're just going to go with it and reuse it, and if we have to, I can change that at another time. Just got to be careful with it that you don't pull them apart like I did. So now I can go ahead and pop this whole spring off of here. We're going to pull off this bump stop. Now we're going to very carefully loosen these and get our coil spring free. So this is a pretty dangerous step. So one thing you want to do is make sure you're positioned sideways against it so that if anything does fly apart, it's likely to go straight out. So don't put yourself right in front of here or here. Okay, so here we have our new strut. We also have our new coil spring. You can see the difference here. It's a much beefier spring. It's also shorter. Even though it's a lot shorter, it doesn't mean that the car is going to sit that much different because this is stronger than this one was. So that'll make up for some of the height difference. And we've got our new struts here. I'm going to start by just popping off this safety retainer clip. And pulling off this protective cap here. Now our new spring will sit on here just like so. You want the base of the spring to line up right with that edge of the strut. We're also going to install our bump stop, which we pulled off the old strut, and our dust shield to sit just like so. And now, let's see, we'll find out if we need the compressor to put this on. Sometimes when you're installing lower end springs, you can get away without using the compressor on the new ones. I am going to have to compress this spring a little bit, nothing like we did on the factory one. So I'll just do like I did before and put our spring compressor on here and just take off about an inch of tension probably. It's a good idea not to use an impact wrench to tighten down this top nut. So I'm going to try getting this tight. Just a socket, but I don't know how I'm going to hold this shaft from spinning. All right, so I'm going to tighten this down as much as it'll go with just a ratchet. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this strut back into the car now. Yeah, let's see. I have to undo my bungee cord again, briefly. What we do is just line up the holes here and get one of these guys started. Actually, get two of them started. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten down our 4 bolts, which will lock the top of the strut in place. So our new strut is in the car. Now we just have to finish bolting it up. So we'll lift it back up on the lift and bolt everything to it. Okay, so now we're just going to put everything back together in the reverse order that it came off. We're going to start with our steering knuckle. One thing we still need to do is reconnect our sway bar, but because we're changing the sway bar on the front too, we're not going to reconnect that just yet. So I'm just going to let that hang for now. Before we do the sway bar, I'm going to go ahead and replace the strut on the passenger side. So now we're just going to do the exact same thing like we did on the other side. Again, take off the bracket for the brake line and ABS wire, take off our strut or our sway bar link, pop out our little plastic Christmas tree thing for the ABS wire, and then take out the bolts for the strut to steering knuckle. Okay, so our next step, the suspension kit also includes a new front sway bar and sway bar bushings. To access that, first we have to drop this shield, which is also what you drop when you do an oil change. It's just got 1, 2, 8mm bolts, 3 8mm bolts. Once we lower or take those off, it should just swing down out of our way. So we got our shield down. Next step, we're going to get this support here. It's one big piece out of the way. It's got a couple bolts on the back here, and then one here, and then another one kind of hidden up here. So we're going to have to pull this shield down some of the way. I don't think it has to come all the way. Looks like it has, those are probably 1/4-inch bolts. All right, these are actually 7mm bolts. So these back ones are slotted, so I think I can just pull it forward, there we go, and drop it down. Like so. Now you can see the sway bar. I think you can see the sway bar. We've got our end links here, our bushings here, and our other end link. So our next step is going to be go ahead and take off these 15mm nuts holding on the bushings. All right, so we're going to take off these nuts on the sway bar bushings. Okay, now the sway bar should just kind of push back and pop off these brackets here. There we go. And we can work it out of the car. Just like that, it's out. So we'll bring this to the back and set it up next to our new one. Okay, so you can see here our new sway bar up against the original one. The new one actually has 3 adjustment settings. We're going to go with the middle setting, which is supposed to be kind of a combination of sport handling, but it's still streetable. But the other 2 allow for either softer handling or real extreme grip. But we're going to go with the middle one since the car will be a street car. Now, just like on the rear sway bar, we're going to install our new bushings. We're going to start by putting some grease inside the bushing here. Also, you'll see these new caps do have grease fittings on them. So if you ever need to add grease to it in the future, you can just pop these off and squirt some grease in there. We'll go ahead and swap over our sway bar links too while it's out in the open. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and place our sway bar back up in place. Got to get our end links over the lower control arms first. And then just kind of get it all back up into place here. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and snug it up. Now, when I took it apart, the sway bar was about 1 to 2 inches off of the lower control arm. I'm going to hold it in that position when I go to do the final tightening. I'm not sure whether this sway bar will free pivot inside these bushings or not, but if it does not, I want it to be in almost the same position as when I took it off. So as I get close to tightening it, you'll see me pick up on the sway bar. All right, so now I'm just going to put up our brace here again. Let's see. I'm going to put this side in first and slide this. To a notch there and notch there. Okay. There we go. Okay, our last thing to do is to reinstall the upper sway bar links. Before I tighten that, I'm just going to go pop the other side in just to make sure it goes in. Okay. Good, good. Everything's lining up. All right, I'll go ahead and tighten this down. And I'll tighten down the other side, same thing. All right, so we have the car on the ground. As you can see, it is sitting lower. It'll actually lower a little bit more too as it drives and the springs break in. But compared to the original, it helps close up this gap here on the fender, especially in the back. It's got a nice even squat now. So what we need to do now is bring it down to the alignment shop to get an alignment on it, because anytime you lower a car or change suspension parts, it will throw the alignment out of whack. But that is it for now. We appreciate you watching. Always keep auto parts direct to you in mind when you need auto parts, and thanks again for watching.